It's stunning, and it really is. There is a feel to it, and I think one of the things we've discovered over many discussions with people in remote places is that we really have no good way, unless we deliberately check in with how does it feel in Florida, in Michigan.
So when you say remote places, you mean like in the outback? Like what
No,
do you mean by remote?
I mean remote from you. That
So for anyone trying to understand what it feels like to be on the ground in place X, you actually, to some degree, I mean, this is the value in the absurdly weaponized term lived experience, right? What is it to actually be there and see with your own eyes and experience with all of your other senses what life is like in Florida or Venice or wherever, right?
Well, I think I'm actually pointing to almost the opposite premise,
Okay.
which is that when people say lived experience, right, they can say, well, you may have all the data in the world on what it's like to be Black in America, but there's nothing you can do that substitutes for my, were I Black, my lived experience, right?
Right.
And of course, there's one way in which this is undeniable, and there's another way in which we don't even know what your lived experience means because we don't know what kinds of biases went into formulating it. We don't know how representative it is. We don't know, any of the things that you would want to know. It's not data, which doesn't mean it doesn't contain something. But in this case, what I'm increasingly noticing, sort of generally in the internet age, but increasingly as we go quite obviously mad, the fact that one has no basis to assume that something that you would normally assume that other people had seen and felt together is actually a shared experience.
Yes.
Right? You have to check in.
Yes.
And so,
yeah, actually that fits very well with some of the places we want to go here today.
yeah, it's a key thing, because if you just are on autopilot and your sense, the problem is it's born of a very normal assumption that is in general rock solid, right? If you're standing with somebody somewhere and you're looking at something, the chances that they can see it too are very, very high, right? Unless it's very tiny and difficult for you to perceive, in which case you would know that you had to say, it's right over there by the thing.
Well, I mean, I think this points to at least two things. One is the necessity of intact and deeply nuanced theories of mind. Right, like humans are not the only organisms that have theory of mind, which is to say, the ability to attribute to someone else a different understanding of reality, or a different emotional state, or a different, understanding of a different understanding of reality, really, than what you yourself have. I've mentioned here before the excellent book Baboon Metaphysics by the two primatologists Dorothy Cheney and Robert Seyfarth, Cheney and Seyfarth, a married couple who spent a lot of time in Botswana and the Okavango River Delta studying these baboons, who find terrific evidence for theory of mind in baboons. And of course, it's been noted in crows, in I think dolphins, and certainly elephants and wolves and parrots. So a number of these other groups, all of which independently evolve an ability to ascertain that which you believe is not necessarily that which I believe. Right. And we also, there's, a number of developmental psychology studies that point to when it is in a child's life, they tend to begin to develop a theory of mind. I don't actually remember when that moment is, something before 2 years for sure, but it may be well before that.
Well, it's not fully developed until much later. And so there are a series of elaborate experiments, which you're alluding to here, in which, you can, a child who's old enough to speak, you can ask them to tell you what it is that someone else will have seen, and then by adjusting when it is that person entered and left the room, and so an adult would know, they didn't see that development. You can tell.
Yeah, actually, I'm not sure the 2-year mark. I don't remember. You're right that it's sort of this sliding scale of nuance in theory of mind, and I think part of our confusion, our sort of global, our humanity-wide confusion right now, at least for those with the internet, which is basically all of the subset of humanity with whom all of us and you watching and listening are engaging with, are pretty much people who are have access to the internet, is that the internet, to a greater degree even than TV, which came before it, but TV did this as well, because it shows you real people. You imagine that they are part of your social group. right? That they are part of your social group, and that they therefore have been sharing the same things and knowing the same things as everyone else. And so we sort of drop some of the usual requirements for theory of mind when we assume, well, like you're part of my group, therefore I know that you and I have seen the same thing. We might disagree on what it means, but at least we have a common experience. And no, it's not true. It's not
Right.
true. And I think you and I see this in particular because we have people who are showing up to talk with us, mostly virtually, but also whom we're talking with in real life, who are coming from really, across the political spectrum. Right. Like, so we have people who see any critique of Trump as evidence of Trump derangement syndrome. And we have people who see any evidence of the protests that become riots as evidence of secretly, cryptically loving Trump. And it seems like never the twain shall meet, but we can actually see that one of the commonalities there is you actually have literally seen different things than we've seen. Like
Right.
in your feeds, in your life and in your media feeds, you are literally being shown and told, and that those two things are also collapsed. The showing and the telling is being collapsed into a single point by most media, including most journalists, such that the analysis is wrapped into the showing, such that you can't untangle it.
It is a novel kind of bias that I think we haven't yet named. And I think the problem here, like with many of these novel modern phenomena, is that it is partly conscious and partly emergent. And so because it is these two things, to the extent that you sound like you're alleging a conspiracy to edit down to one set of facts, you sound like a crazy person. And, to the extent that you think, well, I saw it on my feed. It's not fake. The point is you're naive, and the truth is really subtle in one way, which is that we have algorithms. First of all, we have publishers that appear to have suspended the most basic journalistic rules, and I think they've done it temporarily. I think they think, well, this is just such a dire circumstance that, we're going to forego, and it's a little bit like the argument for lockdown, right?
Yep.
The argument for lockdown is, look, civil liberties are really important. This is a novel, contagious, dangerous phenomenon for which we need to temporarily, change our ordering of the priorities. And the fact is, I think there's a great argument for that. It doesn't mean it's not being deployed cynically. Right. And the problem is that the platforms and the publishers are now adjusting the fabric of reality. And because they think they're doing it intentionally for a good reason, they have completely lost track and lost control of the degree to which they are changing the necessary parameters for even building a basic model of reality.
Oh, and it's a particularly human, maybe not. It's a particularly any kind of organism with theory of mind and technology, and that's not purely limited to humans, but we've obviously taken it to a greater degree than anyone else. Kind of arrogance that imagines that doesn't understand Chesterton's fence. Again, an idea that we've come back to and back to and back to in this live stream, and as we talk about a lot in our book. The idea that when you come upon a fence and you don't know what it's for, but it's irritating to you for some reason, you should not be allowed to get rid of it unless and until you can, at the very least, bare minimum, come to understand why the people who put it there. What is its intended use? It's possible it has outgrown its use.
Right.
It is possible it no longer has the utility that it had, or that it was put up with good intentions and it's doing something bad, or that it was an error in the first place and was put up with bad intentions. All of those things are possible. But when you find such a structure, you don't get rid of it without first trying to understand what it is there for in the first place. And frankly, a lot of modern psychology makes this error. A lot of modern medicine makes this error. We just over and over and over again. But what you're speaking to with regard to, well, and you and I were, have been advocates for the lockdown in order to deal with the virus, especially early on. But it does come with this risk that once you take some civil liberties away, how do you get them back?
Right. And in fact, the Chesterton's fence thing is canonically going to run up against every counterintuitive right. Right? Counterintuitive rights, by their very nature, are a version of Chesterton's fence. You inherit free speech. You don't know what it's good for because you haven't seen the alternative. And it seems like, you know what's really irritating? Some of these terrible things that people say.
I really don't want to hear them anymore.
I really don't want to hear these terrible. There's some truly vile stuff being said, right? And in this case, I think.
And not only don't I want to hear them, but I don't want you to hear them because it's bad for you.
It's bad for you.
Yeah.
Right. And the thing is, everybody gets that, including the people who formulated these rights.
Right.
They formulated them because there was a higher principle. And until you've lived with the absence of this freedom, you don't really understand why you should be tolerating vile speech. Right. And the answer is because not tolerating it eliminates speech you need to hear, but is heterodox or counterintuitive or whatever.
And actually, let me just say too, some of the frankly naive pushback that I'll hear to the little sarcastic spoofing we were just doing of the anti-free speech people is, well, why don't you then object to obscuring what's available to children? Well, children are children. Yep. And it is exactly the adults' roles, and specifically parents' roles, to protect children until they are of an age where they can actually make decisions and choices for themselves. And when is that, and how is that? And these are all judgment calls that we should be having conversations about as a society. But certainly within the family, that is an expectation that children are protected from some things, the more so earlier on.